Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of the BSB Podcast. For this episode, we went way back into our archives to bring you our Come From Away discussion. This episode was recorded when we were fresh in our podcasting journey, but today you get to join us as we explore the characters and stories from this Tony Award-winning musical. But before we dive in, like, follow, and subscribe to us at bsb.insider on all social media platforms. And as always, spoiler warning. If you haven't seen Come From Away, be warned that anything and everything is on the table for the discussion. Thanks again for joining us and enjoy the show.
Joining me today always is my co-pilot to this nonstop plane ride, RJ Miller-Zelinko. How you doing today?
Plane ride gets me.
Why? Why does that get you?
Plane ride versus flight.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's called improvisation, and I didn't do it very well.
I mean, I dig it. I was like, why does that sound so funny in my head? And then I was like, oh yeah, because it's called a flight.
Because it doesn't exist.
Because there is a word for that.
I saw something yesterday that said reverse progression, and someone said, there's a word for that. And now I feel like I'm the reverse progression of flights here.
It's fine. I did that earlier, as we know, so.
So obviously we're here to talk about Come From Away, which I had never seen before, which feels like I said in my review of this, that this felt like a travesty that I have never once seen the show before because I loved it so much. Have you seen Come From Away?
From far away. Yes.
From the balcony.
I mean, I worked the show when it came through Grand Rapids a couple of years ago and was, probably, I wasn't working the orchestra. I was working like balcony or mezzanine or something. So I caught glimpses, but enough glimpses to enjoy it.
So, you kind of knew what the story was about. I guess, before you were ushering, did you know, how did you hear about Come From Away? Did you know about it when it was on running?
Well, I think, actually, that's a lie. I heard one song, it just came across my Spotify playlist that I really, really liked. And I was like, what is this from? As one does. Which then ventured into my, timely obsession with the soundtrack. But it is a show that's very hard to follow via the soundtrack because, as we're about to discuss, same people playing multiple characters, and when you can't see that and you can only slightly hear the variations in voices, you really have no concept of what's going on. So that was technically my first exposure to it.
I mean, that is fair. I think before we get into that aspect, I think we got to break down the show a little bit for everybody. This is a story about the city of Gander, Newfoundland, during the events of 9/11. So while it's really kind of associated with American history, it's also vastly removed. I feel like that's the best way to kind of describe the beginning aspects of that story. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
It's very much this. It's about 38 planes, 7,000 people who were landed on an island which had kind of been forgotten by the aviation world. It once was kind of a hub, and they take these people in, and it's mostly about the relationships of the people who live there versus the people who are landed and the bonds that they make through those relationships. And this goes to the point that you said, a lot of these people play somebody in Gander, somebody on the airplane. Sometimes multiple people are in Gander and multiple people on the airplane. And so I can understand why that would be confusing from the soundtrack.
Yeah. And obviously it becomes way more clear when you see the show and you can kind of hear the separation of accents a little bit more, but singing voices tend to be a little bit more similar than speaking accents. A lot of times people aren't singing in as strong of an accent as they would speak.
Absolutely. I mean, it was played up very much like the Don't You Knows and, when you're seeing the show, but it really is from start to finish. I think the thing that was interesting about the show is that it's all singing. it kind of reminded you of like a Les Mis without being a Les Mis, like where you're just from start to finish. It's like one song into the next, this to the next. Compared to ushering it perhaps, or seeing an album, what was that kind of like, it's a one shot straight through for the show. What parts did you feel like really worked for that?
I mean, the pace of the show, I think it's appropriate because you don't want to sit too long. There's just so much storytelling to be had that you have to keep it moving. Like you said, some of them are covering 2, 3, 4 characters, but maybe they're only covering a character for like a line or two. So yeah, you have to keep it moving, and I think that is a part of trying to be as true as possible to the actual events, and trying to encompass as many viewpoints as they could in a small amount of time.
For sure. So for this story, because we really do kind of want for this episode to focus on the story, what stories or narratives from this show really kind of stuck with you, or kind of did you find yourself kind of gravitating towards? There's so many good ones.
Yeah. Well, initially, once again, my initial draw was to the captain.
It's not surprising.
Her like power ballad is the first song I ever heard, and the role was originated by Jen. I never know how to say her last name. Colella,
the one in Sus.
Yes, and that ironic. This show is the reason that I found out about Sus. She is the reason that I found out about Sus, because she originated this captain role. Her solo song was my that storyline is one of my favorites. I think because of many reasons. I mean, you have encompasses family, but it also encompasses history from another dynamic point, with her being, the first female American pilot. So, yeah, I'm all about that.
I was going to say that is definitely I think one of the themes that really sticks out about this show is kind of like the ways in which people are divided as much as they're brought together. And her song, Me in the Sky, is about kind of the trials and tribulations of becoming the first female pilot for a commercial airline. And that's really, it's really powerful, and it kind of, reflects with some of the other stories, but that one really does stand out because she's kind of got this whole weight on her shoulders of all these people she's responsible for. And all she's ever wanted to do is to fly. And she had so many challenges to getting there.
Yeah, it's giving a little Alphaba moment, I think.
I would agree. I would say if there's going to be a point where someone's going to have a battle cry, it's going to be during there. What's interesting to me is that, that one is definitely a powerful one. I was finding myself drawn to Diane and Nick for some reason, and I don't know if this is the hopeless romantic in me or not, but Diane is, this character. I believe she's from Texas. I could be wrong there. I know they're all flying towards Texas, this plane specifically. And she meets Nick, who is from England, who's going on a business trip, and they kind of are forced to be together, and they kind of fall in love. And I do think that there was a lot of beauty in the storyline, especially when you pair it with the storylines of Kevin J and Kevin T, who are slowly falling up, their love is falling apart as Nick and Diane are falling together. And so I felt that those two parallel storylines, when you I feel like you can't look at them separately, you almost have to look at them together. And those dynamics of what does trauma do to people? I thought that was really beautiful about Come From Away.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much, and I would be very interested in doing a little bit more research on the aftermath of them, because it is I can't imagine basically maybe thinking that you could be dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that you're stranded in a place where no one knows you amongst thousands of people and just happen to, continuously bump into someone. And yeah, very, very
Hopeless romantic. Through and through.
Also, like a beautiful thing, obviously, to come out of a tragedy.
Mm-hmm. And for a while there, it doesn't look like it's gonna, like, at first when I first saw them and they're like on the plane, they're kind of talking, they're like, oh, they're just gonna be friendly. She's kind of freaked out a little bit, obviously, rightfully so. This is a world, I think, for those who are too young to remember, there was not really cell phones the way there were today. Especially during that time. Like, you could not get calls through during 9/11. Like, this was like everybody's trying to call. Everybody's trying to make those phone calls. And so, Diane's trying to get a hold of her kids. Nick is absolutely alone. And you just think they're like, oh, they're not going to stay together. And then they start to kind of fall in love. You're like, they're still not going to stay together. And then, like, when you jump that 10 years later and you see that they actually made it work, I'm not going to lie, I teared up a little bit. Like, as RJ can attest, I cried quite a bit during the show. But there was just something, like, it was kind of beauty to see, I think it reminds us that there is tragedy, there's beauty in the tragedy. And I think that people forget that a lot of the time, that, like, when it comes to 9/11, granted, I know that you're younger than me. I was only in 4th grade, so you were only in 3rd grade. There was beauty in how people came together and on a big collectiveness. And I think, like, this is like a small fraction, like, the whole story is about everybody coming together, but this is like the small fraction of what happens when two people who are lost fight each other.
Yeah. And I mean, exactly. We see that happen. We've seen that happen most recently, I think, with the California fires, right? Like, especially when it is some type of disaster type situation. I think those, fight or flight instincts kick in. I think we stop caring about the little stuff and start just caring, period. And that's what happens.
And, along those lines, you do see this in the show. I can't think of who the other character, Richard Chaz Gomez, plays. I know he plays Kevin T, but he plays the bus, like, union guy. And you see him like okay, we're going to bury the fact that we're fighting over this contract to help people. And, like, we'll come back to this later. We can set aside our differences and we can be there together. And so there was again, that part of, like, the little things don't really matter when it gets to be when something important is kind of coming up. Or Bonnie, Bonnie's another one. She's taking care of animals and she doesn't care about getting in trouble about going into these planes, all these small things of humanity at their best. Can I ask you about Hannah and Beulah, though? Because I think that this, to me, was the most important relationship. Did that strike you at all?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, pretty much from the get-go, how that's gonna go, unfortunately. Because that is the experience that so many parents and family members had that day or that week and month and so on. But once again, when we talk about finding things that are similar, even in a completely remote town in the middle of nowhere for these people coming in, like, they don't know where they are, who these people are, like, finding similarities in this case, that their children were firefighters, finding that and then kind of clinging to that, and it being obviously massive part of a friendship that becomes lifelong. That's, again, like, within tragedy, we find purpose.
I think that that was the one that hit me the most. And I'm actually going to try not to cry right now because this one still, as I was writing my review, this relationship hit me the hardest. And I feel like I feel like I need to preface this by saying that I don't have children of my own. I have nephews that I care about. And the moment that they showed Hannah trying to call, and shout out to the actress Hannah Catherine Wall, who did a fantastic job in this role. And same to Christian Litzenberg, who played Beulah, who we got to talk to. The moment she tried to call for her son, I knew right then that it wasn't going to work out. And I, in that moment, was like, okay, you're going to cry. Like, you're going to happen. It's going to cry. You're going to be a baby. That's fine. We'll live with this. And in that one moment where Beulah can walk away and she turns around and says, like, it's not the same, but my son also is a firefighter. Like, it's not the same as being in New York. It's not the same as being in here. Like, that moment of, like, the empathy, which, again, this whole show is kind of about empathy at its core, of just being like you and I have something in common, and I can't understand what you're going through, but I can at least empathize on what you're going through. And then when you find out that he doesn't survive, and Beulah ends up still being there, it's giving me chills right now. There was just something so, like, this whole show is beautiful, but, like, there was just something so beautiful and so raw about that storyline. And again, you see this in every person's storyline in different ways, but there was this is a storyline that almost gave you hope. Like, Diana Nix gives you hope about love in, like, a hopeless place, and Beverly gives you hope about having strength to persevere. But there's was about hope about finding the person who's, like, not a romantic partner, but, like, is your person that's going to help you get through your darkest times. And that just made me love the show so much.
Yeah, like, those are the types of friendships that you don't always see or hear about. I think especially, and I don't know exactly, like, what ages they were, but I think especially, like, when you're kind of midlife, as we know, like, growing older, it automatically becomes harder to make friends or keep friendships. And so I think that also the potency of knowing that, you know, they visited each other, and obviously 10 years plus later, they were still getting together and seeing each other, based on what, 4 days they were there, I think.
Yes.
That's insane. That is, like, you met someone for 4 days who started as a stranger and became lifelong friends. And yeah, I mean, I guess maybe for women, we hear about it a little bit more often, but I think it's a good reminder for men too. And I think that's also what this show kind of highlighted too, was that I'm thinking of, I don't think we ever got a character name, but one of the plain people and one of the mayors, right?
Yes.
And initially the concern about his wallet getting taken or taking people's barbecues, but at the end of it, once again, flash forward 10 years and they're still drinking whiskey together and hanging out, and obviously not at the same level as we're talking about, but still, like, those friendships, yeah, we tend to lean towards the romantic because who doesn't enjoy that? But these, I'm glad that they did highlight something like this.
And along those lines too, I think that's, you mentioned about like the gendered relationships, but also just like the characterizations that you get in this story of, like, Kevin G, that's from Mean Girls. Kevin T and Kevin J, they're worried about being perceived as gay in a foreign country that they don't really know anybody, and you have Bob, who is worried about being perceived as a black man. And you have Ali, who I think is very important, who is an Egyptian chef, who people throughout the show start to look at it a little bit differently because of the color of his skin and the way that people were starting to perceive people because of what happened in 9/11. So you get like all of these different dynamics of different relationships by sex, by gender, by the color of their skins, which you don't always see in a lot of shows, and the show did not shy away from any of those.
Yeah, the intersectionality of what they were trying to accomplish, I think they accomplished it. Like you mentioned, from gender to sexual orientation to religion to skin color, because that's just the way that it is. That's the world that we live in, right? Like that's who was there. And it's important to highlight that that's who was there, because I think, unfortunately, that's not always the way that history tends to be written.
Sure.
So highlighting true history through art is, I mean, of course, we can kind of start to expect that from, I think, musical theater. We're starting to get more historical or get more things that involve history, which is good because it's another way for people to learn it and know it.
I mean, absolutely. And I think that there was a part of me, having not seen the show, that kind of questioned, like, everybody raved about the show. I should say, like, everybody I knew that had seen the show raved about the show. And in my head, I always had how do you make a show about a world tragedy like that so good? And I think it has to go back to, like, this, like you said, the intersection of all these different things. And it really, at the end, is a story about, like, grief and, like, the humor you can find in those things. And being really just, finding that light in the darkness is what I kept coming back to this entire time. Of like, there's such a dark moment. They even mentioned at one point, like, the television showing just nothing but black clouds and stuff like that. And, like, they're going off to have this moment to just be, we're going to go become Newfoundlanders and stuff like that. So I do think that's what there is, this whole beauty. And no wonder why it won the Tony Award, like, it deserved everything that it got.
Yeah, and I mean, specifically around, as tragedy do, like, we focus so much on the tragedy part of it, that it is refreshing and just, again, real to say life was still happening, right? Like, it's a reminder that, I mean, obviously there was a major focus, as those of us who lived through it know, in New York City. We all did is sit there. I mean, it was very real, right? Like, I remember leaving school early. I remember my mom having the TV on, and it was the same thing over and over. And they talk about people just stared at it, right, until they turned it off. And that I think is an experience that so many people did. And that's again, one of the things that makes the show great is that it's just the lived experiences are very real, which I think brings the audience in, to be able to feel comfortable enough to laugh at the jokes, to cry when it's sad, and to just feel everything all of the time.
It's very much a love letter, not just to the people who lost somebody, but to the people whose lives were changed. And it was everybody. Everybody who lives in America's life was changed that day. And this was 100%, like you said, you got to laugh and you got to cry. And the people who created the show, something that Kristen had told me in an interview was that it's one act, and it's the exact time that they try to aim from when the struck one tower to the other plane hitting the other tower. Like, there's so much small details and so much love put into this that you can't help but feel the love from everybody involved and from the show, and get to laugh and cry and be moved along with everybody else. I wasn't sitting near you, so I don't know if you were actually crying, but I'm assuming that there was probably a single tear somewhere, right? Just like a little one down the cheek. That's a no.
I mean, I think there was. I don't know if it was when I thought it was going to be. Like, I thought it was going to be at the end.
Okay.
But it was, I think, towards like the middle or towards the beginning. It might have been the initial shock point, right? Of when they got off the buses and started watching the TVs. Because I'm an empath, and when you have a room full of people kind of, because really we're all sitting there collectively reliving a trauma, right? Like in this
100%.
show, you were thinking back to everything you experienced. So we're in a room full of thousands or 1,000-ish people reliving a trauma. And so I think that, and usually that's true for myself, is I'm feeling what everyone around me is feeling, or that's what I'm picking up on. And it's less about what's actually happening on stage.
I know what moment you're talking about. When they got off and they're watching the televisions, I actually I could feel myself not breathing. Like I could feel myself I felt like I was choking. And it's the same feeling I actually got when we went to the World Trade Center Museum last year. And I just for that moment felt like, how can I possibly breathe going through this again? Which, as a psychologist, is a trauma response. We're having a trauma response to something. And one of the ways to get through trauma is to live it and to live it differently and try to make different connections. And I think that's what this show really does. It helps to, like you said, collectively, we're all kind of healing as we're being exposed one more time. And so I think it hits differently. And for that is part of the beauty of the show. Before we run out of time, though, I want to ask you, did you feel at all were you at all confused with the fact that there's so many people playing so many characters and they're kind of switching with like a sweater on, sweater off, they're a cap on, cap off. Like, was it confusing at all for you?
So this time, no, but also because there is a pro shot of this that came out during COVID or right around COVID and on Apple TV, and I watched that. Now that I'm thinking of it. And so I'm familiar enough now with who is going where and is like what the symbolism behind what they're wearing is and what character that is. But initially, I had no idea. I was very confused.
I did not know there was a pro shot, and now I know I can watch every single night. That's crazy. I have to say that I think that there was I having got a warning from Kristen, and when I was talking with her during the interview, I was prepared, but I still think there was a single moment of being the who's what's going on kind of thing, and they do a very good job of switching it as they're going. They're making things look like the airplane. They're definitely switching accents. They don't have ways to kind of switch it, but I think that's the only thing that I could possibly see people would have an issue with the show is that maybe they're a little confused at first of who's who and what's what and what's going on. But now maybe everybody should just watch the pro shot ahead of time. So.
I mean, yeah, and some of those, like I said, they're 1 line, 2 line. I mean, they're running to do those costume changes or, switch a hat or a jacket. Very subtle, but enough that you do, you can't sleep on it, right? If you close your eyes for a second, you could be looking at 5 different characters than you were a second ago.
100%. So we are running out of time, so look for our part 2 of our Come From Away discussion, where we be breaking down more of the highs and lows from this hugely inspiring show. Again, I am your captain, Brian, and joining me is RJ Miller-Zelinko, co-captain of this plane, flight. Thank you again for joining us here in our box seats till our next curtain call.